Her true story from California. I paid his bills. Then he said, "Get out." Hello there. My name is Margaret and I'm 73 years old. I'm sitting here in my little apartment in Oceanside, California, watching the morning fog roll in from the Pacific. The air smells like salt and jasmine from Mrs. Rodriguez's garden next door. It's peaceful now, but it wasn't always this way. I want to tell you my story. Not because I'm bitter. I'm not anymore. But because I think there might be other women out there who need to hear this. Women who are giving and giving until there's nothing left of themselves. Women who are being taken advantage of by the very people they love most. 3 years ago, I was living in a beautiful 2-bedroom house in Encinitas. I'd bought it with my late husband Robert after he retired from the Navy. We chose California because Robert always said the weather would be good for his arthritis. He was right about that. The house had a small garden where I grew tomatoes and roses, and every morning I'd sit on the porch with my coffee, watching the hummingbirds dance around the feeder. Robert passed away 5 years ago now. Cancer. The doctors said he fought longer than most, but that didn't make losing him any easier. After the funeral, after all the casseroles from neighbors stopped coming, I found myself alone in that house for the first time in 47 years of marriage. But I wasn't completely alone. I had my son, David. He was 38 then, living in San Diego, about 30 minutes away. David had always been my baby, even when he grew tall and broad-shouldered like his father. When he was little, he used to tell me he'd take care of me when I got old. "Don't worry, Mama," he'd say. "I'll always look after you." Those first months after Robert died, David was wonderful. He'd drive up on weekends to check on me, help with the yard work, fix little things around the house. We'd sit on the porch together, and he'd tell me about his job at the construction company, about the girl he was dating, about his dreams of starting his own business someday. "Mom, you know I love you, right?" he'd say. And I'd pat his hand and tell him I knew. I was so grateful to have him. So many of my friends had children who lived across the country, who called once a week if they were lucky. But David was here. David cared. The house felt less empty when he was around. I'd cook his favorite meals, pot roast with mashed potatoes, chocolate chip cookies like I used to make when he was in Little League. We'd watch old movies together, and sometimes he'd fall asleep on the couch like he did when he was a teenager. I'd cover him with the Afghan I'd knitted years ago, and for a moment, time would feel suspended. My boy was home. I should have known something was changing when he started mentioning money more often. It was subtle at first. "Mom, I don't know how you manage on just Dad's pension and Social Security," he'd say. "Everything's so expensive now." Or, "I wish I could help you more, but this economy, you know?" I'd assure him I was fine. Robert had been good with money, and between his military pension, our savings, and Social Security, I wasn't struggling. I lived simply. I didn't need much. But David seemed worried, and I appreciated that he cared about my financial security. Then came the first request. It was in March, I remember, because the jacaranda tree in my front yard was blooming purple. David called me on a Tuesday evening, and I could hear stress in his voice. "Mom, I hate to ask this," he said, "but I'm in a tight spot. My truck broke down, and I need it for work. The repair is $1,200, and I just don't have it right now. Could you help me out? I'll pay you back as soon as I can." Of course I said yes. What mother wouldn't? I drove to the bank the next morning and had them wire the money to his account. When I called to tell him it was done, he sounded so relieved, so grateful. "Thank you, Mom." "I mean it. You're a lifesaver. I'll pay you back next month when I get my bonus." I told him not to worry about it, that he was my son and I was happy to help. And I meant it. The money didn't matter. What mattered was that he needed me, that I could still be useful to him. At 70, I was still taking care of my boy, but that bonus never came. Or rather, it did, but David never mentioned paying me back. When I gently brought it up a few weeks later, he looked surprised, as if he'd forgotten entirely. "Oh, Mom, of course. I'm sorry. Things have just been crazy at work. I'll get it to you soon." I didn't push. Family isn't about keeping score, I told myself. Besides, David had been coming by more often, sometimes twice a week. He'd help me with groceries, take me to doctor's appointments. This was his way of paying me back, I reasoned. His time was worth more than money anyway. But then May came, and David called again. This time his girlfriend had moved out, and he couldn't afford the rent on his apartment alone. Could I help him with $800? Just until he found a roommate? I hesitated for the first time, not because I didn't have the money, but because something in his tone was different. Less apologetic, more expectant, as if he assumed I'd say yes. "I really appreciate you helping me, Mom," he said when I told him I'd transfer the money. "You're the best. I don't know what I'd do without you." The words were right, but they felt rehearsed somehow. Still, I pushed the feeling away. This was David, my son. He was going through a rough patch, and I was his mother. This is what mothers do. Summer brought more requests. His car insurance was due. His credit card had an emergency charge. His phone was going to be shut off. Each time I helped. Each time he promised to pay me back. Each time I told him not to worry about it. But something else was changing too. The way he spoke to me. The way he looked at me. I remember one evening in July. I'd made dinner for us. Grilled salmon with lemon, asparagus from my garden. David was on his phone during most of the meal, texting someone. When I asked him to put it away, he looked at me with irritation. "Mom, I'm handling something important here. Can you not? Can you not?" That's what he said. Like I was some stranger interrupting his business, not his mother who had just cooked him a meal with her own hands. I felt a chill run through me, but I tried to keep my voice light. "I just thought we could have a nice dinner together, like we used to." He sighed, loud and exaggerated. "We are having dinner. I'm just multitasking." Multitasking. During the few hours a week we spent together. I finished my meal in silence while he continued typing on his phone. The salmon tasted like cardboard. August was worse. David started showing up unannounced, but not to visit. He'd come to ask for something, money, food, to do his laundry. My house had become a convenience store to him. One day, he brought a bag of dirty clothes and dumped them on my kitchen table. "Thanks, Mom. I'll pick these up tomorrow." "David," I said carefully, "I don't mind helping you, but maybe you could ask first. I had plans this afternoon." He stopped mid-stride and turned to look at me. "Plans? What plans? You're retired, Mom. What could you possibly have planned?" The dismissal in his voice was like a slap. What could I possibly have planned? As if being retired meant my time had no value. As if I was just sitting around waiting for him to need something. "I volunteer at the library on Tuesdays," I said quietly. "I was supposed to help with the children's reading program." "Oh," he shrugged. "Well, this is more important. The reading thing can wait. More important. His laundry was more important than my commitments, my life, my sense of purpose." I wanted to argue, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I called the library and canceled. I spent the afternoon washing his clothes, folding them carefully the way I used to when he was small. But there was no gratitude in it anymore, just obligation. September brought the biggest request yet. David needed first and last month's rent for a new apartment, $3,000. I was starting to feel the strain on my savings account, but when I gently mentioned that the money was adding up, he exploded. "Are you serious right now? I'm your son, Mom. Your only child. Dad's gone. I'm all you have left. And you're worried about money?" The words hit me like physical blows. I'm all you have left. He was right, of course. Robert was gone. I had a few friends, but no other family. David was my world, and he knew it. "I'm not worried about the money," I whispered. I just want to make sure I can keep helping you." His expression softened slightly, but it felt calculated. "I know, Mom. I'm sorry. I'm just stressed, you know? Starting over is hard. But this is the last time, I promise. Once I get settled in this new place, I'll get back on my feet." I believed him because I needed to believe him. I transferred the money that afternoon, but it wasn't the last time. October brought another request. November brought two more. By December, I had given my son nearly $15,000. I was starting to dip into the savings Robert and I had planned to leave as an inheritance. The same inheritance that was supposed to go to David someday. The betrayal came on a Tuesday in January. I remember because it was raining, which is unusual for Southern California. I was making soup, chicken noodle, David's favorite, when he called. "Mom, I need to talk to you. I'm coming over." Something in his voice made my stomach clench. He arrived 20 minutes later, shaking rain from his jacket. He didn't hug me hello like he usually did. He didn't comment on the soup simmering on the stove. He just stood in my living room, looking uncomfortable. "Mom, sit down. We need to talk." I sat on the couch, my hands folded in my lap. "What is it, honey? Is everything okay?" He paced for a moment, then stopped in front of me. "I've been thinking about your situation here, this house. It's too big for you. You're getting older, and it's not safe for you to be alone in a place this size." "I'm fine, David. I've been managing just fine." "No, Mom, you're not fine. You're 73 years old. What if you fall? What if something happens? I worry about you." I studied his face, looking for the concern he claimed to feel. But his eyes were cold, calculating. "What are you suggesting?" "I think you should sell the house, move into a senior community or something smaller. Somewhere safer." The words hit me like a physical blow. Sell the house? The house Robert and I had chosen together? The house where we'd spent our happiest years? The house where I'd raised David during his teenage years after his father's first stroke? "David, this is my home. Your father and I—" "Dad's gone, Mom." His voice was sharp. "And you're living in the past. This house is just a burden now. It's too much for you to maintain, and frankly, it's not a good investment sitting here empty most of the time." Empty most of the time. As if my living in it didn't count. As if my presence, my life, my daily routines were nothing. "I don't want to sell," I said quietly. "Mom, be practical. You could make good money from this sale. Enough to buy something smaller and still have money left over. Money you could use to help yourself. Or," he paused, and I saw something flicker across his face. "Or help me get completely back on my feet." And there it was, the real reason. He didn't want me to sell the house for my safety or my benefit. He wanted me to sell it so he could have access to the money. "No," I said. "I'm not selling my home." His face changed then. The mask of concern slipped away, replaced by something cold and ugly. "Mom, you're being selfish and stubborn. You're living in a house that's way too big for you, hoarding money that could actually be useful." Hoarding money. My life savings, the money Robert and I had scrimped and saved for decades, was hoarding to him. "David, I've given you over $15,000 in the past year, and I'm grateful, but that's not the point. The point is that you're being impractical. You can't live in the past forever." The past. As if my memories of Robert, my life in this house, my desire to maintain some independence were just nostalgia holding him back from what he wanted. I said, "No, David." He stood up abruptly, running his hands through his hair. Fine, Mom, if that's how you want to be." He grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. Then he stopped and turned back. "You know what? Maybe you're right. Maybe you should keep living in your big empty house all alone. But don't expect me to keep worrying about you. Don't expect me to keep coming by to check on you. If you want to be stubborn by yourself." The door slammed behind him, leaving me alone with my soup and the sound of rain on the windows. For 3 weeks, I didn't hear from him. I called twice, but he didn't answer. I left messages, but he didn't return them. I began to wonder if I'd been wrong. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was being selfish, living in this house alone while he struggled. But then I remembered all the money I'd given him, all the meals I'd cooked, all the times I'd dropped everything to help him. Was it selfish to want to keep my home? The one place where I felt close to Robert? I was wrestling with these thoughts when David finally called in February. His voice was different, warmer, more like the sun I remembered. "Mom, I'm sorry about our fight. I was stressed and I took it out on you. That wasn't fair." Relief flooded through me. "Oh, David, I'm so glad you called. I've been worried." "I know, Mom. I know. Listen, I have an idea. What if I moved in with you for a while, just temporarily? I'm between apartments right now, and it would be nice to spend more time together. Like old times." My heart leaped. More time together. Maybe we could repair our relationship. Maybe things could go back to the way they were. Of course, I said. Of course you can stay here. Your room is just like you left it. Great, I'll move in this weekend. I spent the next few days getting ready. I cleaned his old room, bought his favorite foods, planned meals I knew he'd enjoy. I was excited. My son was coming home. But the David who moved in wasn't the son I remembered. This David treated my house like a hotel. He came and went as he pleased, leaving messes for me to clean up. He ate the food I prepared, but never offered to help with cooking or dishes. He used my washer and dryer constantly, but never folded his own clothes. Worse, he brought friends over without asking. Loud, crude men who tracked mud through my house and left beer bottles on my coffee table. When I gently asked him to check with me before inviting people over, he laughed. Mom, I live here now. I don't need permission to have friends over. Live here, not staying here temporarily. Living here, as if it was his house now. The final straw came 3 months later, in May. I was in the kitchen making breakfast when David walked in with a woman I'd never seen before. She was young, maybe 25, with bleached blonde hair and a tattoo crawling up her neck. Mom, this is Crystal. She's going to be staying here for a while. Staying here. Not asking if she could stay. Informing me that she would be staying. David, I don't think... Mom, don't be difficult. Crystal needs a place to crash for a few weeks. You have plenty of room. The woman, Crystal, looked around my kitchen with undisguised disdain. This place is so old-fashioned, she said. But I guess it'll do. I guess it'll do. My home, where I'd raised my son, where I'd nursed my husband through his final illness, where I'd built a lifetime of memories, would do for this stranger. David, I need to speak with you privately. He rolled his eyes but followed me to the living room. What now, Mom? I'm not comfortable with having a stranger stay in my house. I don't know her, and this is my home. Your home, he repeated. Right. Your home that you're rattling around in all by yourself, while people who actually need space can't find anywhere to live. That's not the point. No, Mom. That is exactly the point. You're being selfish again. You have 4 bedrooms in this house, and you use one. Meanwhile, Crystal is sleeping in her car because she can't afford rent. I felt something crack inside my chest. If you're so concerned about her housing situation, why don't you help her find an apartment? You could use some of the money I've given you. His face went red. Are you serious right now? You're going to throw the money in my face? I'm not throwing anything in your face. I'm just saying... You're just saying you want to control me with money. Well, guess what, Mom? It doesn't work that way. I'm not going to jump every time you wave your checkbook around. I stared at him, this man who looked like my son, but spoke like a stranger. I never tried to control you. I just wanted to help. Help? You call this help? Constantly reminding me how much you've given me, making me feel guilty every time I need something? You never what? Never kept track? Never made me feel like I owed you something? Come on, Mom. Every time you help me, there's a price. And the price is that I have to pretend to be grateful for the rest of my life. The words were like daggers. David, I love you. Everything I've done has been because I love you. Love? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. This isn't love, Mom. This is possession. You think because you pay for things you own me. Well, I've got news for you. You don't. That night, I lay in bed listening to David and Crystal in the next room. They were loud, inconsiderate, treating my home like their personal playground. At 3 a.m., I got up to use the bathroom and found them in my kitchen, going through my cabinets. Oh, hey, Mrs. Crystal started. Margaret, I said quietly. My name is Margaret. Right, Margaret. We were just looking for snacks. They were eating the cookies I'd made for David, the chocolate chip ones that were his favorite as a child. Crystal had crumbs on her lips and chocolate on her fingers. There's fruit in the refrigerator, I said, and crackers in the pantry. We wanted something sweet, David said, not looking at me. I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep. I lay there thinking about how my son had become a stranger, how my home had become a place where I felt like a guest, how the woman who had raised him, sacrificed for him, loved him unconditionally, was now just an obstacle to be managed. The final betrayal came 2 weeks later. I was coming back from the grocery store, my arms full of bags, when I found David and Crystal in the living room with another man I didn't recognize. "Mom, we need to talk," David said. I set down the groceries and faced them. "What is it? This is awkward, but we need you to know. Crystal and I are together now, like together, and we've been talking about our future." I looked at the girl who was young enough to be his daughter, then back at my son. "Okay? The thing is, Mom, we need space, real space, to build our relationship, you know? And having you here—" He paused, looking uncomfortable for the first time in months. "It's just weird. You're always around, always watching us, always commenting on what we're doing." "I live here, David. This is my house." "Right. But that's the thing. Maybe it's time for you to find somewhere else to live. Somewhere more appropriate for someone your age." The words hit me like a physical blow. Somewhere more appropriate for someone my age, as if I was a piece of furniture that no longer matched the decor. "You want me to leave my home?" "Mom, be reasonable. You don't need all this space. Crystal and I do. We're starting our lives together, and we need room to grow." I looked at Crystal, who was examining her nails as if this conversation had nothing to do with her. "And what about you?" I asked her. "What do you think about this?" She looked up, seemingly surprised to be addressed. "I mean, no offense, but it is kind of weird having your boyfriend's mom around all the time. It's like we can't have privacy, you know?" Privacy. In my house. The house I'd owned for 15 years. The house where I'd nursed my husband through his final illness. The house where I'd raised David during his teenage years. "Where exactly do you expect me to go?" I asked. David shrugged. "There are lots of options. Senior communities, assisted living places. Somewhere you could make friends with people your own age." "I don't need assistance, David. I'm perfectly capable of living independently." "Are you, though?" Crystal spoke up. "I mean, you're pretty old, and you seem kind of lonely. Wouldn't it be better to be around other people instead of rattling around in this big house by yourself?" Rattling around. The same phrase David had used months ago. They'd discussed this, planned it, decided together that I was just an inconvenience to be disposed of. "This is my home," I said again, but my voice was weak. "Mom, don't make this harder than it has to be." David's voice had an edge now. "We're trying to be nice about this, but the bottom line is that Crystal and I are building a life together, and we need space to do that. You've had your time in this house. Now it's our turn. Our turn." As if my life was a game of Monopoly and I'd been occupying a property too long. "And if I refuse?" David and Crystal exchanged a look. "Mom, I don't think you want to make this difficult. I mean, I know you love me, and I know you want what's best for me. This is what's best for me." "What about what's best for me?" "What's best for you is accepting that you're getting older and need to start planning for your future accordingly. You can't live in the past forever. The past, again." As if my desire to remain in my home, to maintain my independence, to keep some dignity in my old age was just stubborn nostalgia. I looked at my son, really looked at him, at the man who had once promised to take care of me when I got old, at the boy who used to cry when I left him with babysitters, at the teenager who had written me Mother's Day cards promising to love me forever. "Get out," I whispered. "What?" "Get out." My voice was stronger now. "Both of you, get out of my house." David's face went red. "Mom, you're being ridiculous. Get out!" I screamed, and I barely recognized my own voice. "Get out of my house!" Crystal jumped up from the couch. "David, maybe we should—" "No," he said, his voice cold. "No, we shouldn't. Mom, you're making a huge mistake. If you kick us out, don't expect me to come running back when you need help. Don't expect me to take care of you when you're too old to take care of yourself." "I wouldn't expect that anyway," I said quietly. "Not anymore." He stared at me for a long moment, then grabbed Crystal's hand. "Fine. Have it your way. But don't come crying to me when you're alone and scared and need someone to help you." They left that afternoon, taking everything they'd brought with them. David didn't say goodbye. He didn't hug me. He just loaded his car and drove away, leaving me standing in my driveway, watching the taillights disappear around the corner. The first night alone was the worst. I sat in my living room, surrounded by the silence they'd left behind, and I cried. I cried for the son I'd lost, for the relationship that had been poisoned by greed and selfishness. I cried for the naive woman who had believed that love was enough, that family meant something, that sacrifice would be appreciated. But mostly, I cried for the years I'd wasted, the years I'd spent enabling him, making excuses for him, convincing myself that his behavior was just a phase. The years I'd spent being grateful for crumbs of affection from someone who saw me as nothing more than a source of money. I didn't eat for 2 days. I couldn't bring myself to cook for one person after months of cooking for 3. The house felt enormous and empty. Every room held memories of David, as a child, as a teenager, as the man I'd thought he'd become. I kept expecting him to call, to apologize, to explain that he'd been under stress, that Crystal had been a bad influence, that he didn't mean the things he'd said. I waited by the phone like a lovesick teenager, jumping every time it rang, hoping to hear his voice. But he didn't call. Days turned into weeks, and the silence from him was deafening. I started having nightmares, dreams where I was old and sick and calling for help, but no one came. Dreams where I was dying alone in this house, and David found my body weeks later, annoyed at the inconvenience. Dreams where I was young again, holding baby David, and I could see his future, see what he would become. But I couldn't change it. My friends started to notice. Marie, who lived 2 streets over, stopped by with a casserole and found me still in my pajamas at 3 in the afternoon. "Margaret, honey, what's wrong? You look terrible." I wanted to tell her everything. About the money, about the disrespect, about the betrayal. But I was too ashamed. How do you tell someone that your only child, the boy you raised to be a good man, has become someone you don't recognize? How do you admit that you've been such a fool? "I'm fine," I lied. "Just tired." She didn't believe me, but she didn't push. She left the casserole and a gentle hug, and I added her kindness to the list of things that made me cry. I spent hours looking through old photo albums, trying to figure out where I'd gone wrong. Pictures of David as a baby, chubby and smiling. Pictures of him starting school, losing teeth, playing Little League. Pictures of him graduating high school, getting his first job, bringing home girlfriends. In every picture, he looked happy, loved, cared for. I had been a good mother, hadn't I? I'd fed him, clothed him, supported him through every phase of his life. I'd been there for every milestone, every disappointment, every triumph. But somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being his mother and started being his bank account. Somewhere along the way, he'd stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a resource to be managed. The worst part was the doubt, the voice in my head that whispered, maybe he was right. Maybe I was being selfish, living in this big house alone. Maybe I was being controlling, expecting gratitude for the money I'd given him. Maybe I was just a lonely old woman who couldn't accept that her son had his own life to live. But then I'd remember the look in his eyes when he told me to get out. The coldness, the calculation, the way he'd dismissed my feelings, my needs, my right to dignity in my own home. And I'd know that whatever mistakes I'd made, what he'd done was worse. 3 weeks after David left, I made a decision. I was sitting in Robert's chair, the one he'd spent his final months in, looking out at the garden he'd helped me plant. The roses were blooming, pink and white and red, and I could smell their sweetness through the window. "What should I do, Robert?" I asked the empty room. "What should I do about our son?" And I swear I could hear his voice, the way he'd sounded when he was strong and healthy and the man I'd fallen in love with. "Margaret, you've given him everything. You've got nothing left to give. It's time to take care of yourself." That's when I knew what I had to do. I started with the will. I'd been putting off updating it since Robert died, but now I had a reason to act. I made an appointment with our lawyer, Mr. Patterson, who had handled our affairs for 20 years. "Margaret, I have to ask, are you sure about this? David is your only child." "I'm sure, Mr. Patterson. My son has made it clear that he sees me as a burden and this house as an inconvenience. I won't leave my life's work to someone who has no respect for what Robert and I built together." The new will was simple. Everything would go to the American Cancer Society, in memory of Robert. David would get $1 and an explanation. To my son David, who told me to get out of my own home, I leave $1 and the knowledge that love and respect cannot be bought. Next, I called a realtor. Not to sell the house, David had been wrong about that, but to get it appraised. I wanted to know exactly what I was worth, what I had to work with. Mrs. Henderson, this is a beautiful property. In this market, you could easily get $800,000 for it. $800,000. More than enough to fund my next move. I spent the next month planning. I researched senior communities, not the depressing institutional places David had probably imagined, but active, independent living communities where people my age were hiking and taking classes and traveling. I found one in Oceanside, just 40 minutes away, but a world apart from the life I'd known. It was small, just 60 units, but it was right on the bluff overlooking the ocean. The residents were active, engaged, living full lives. There was a community garden, a library, a fitness center. It looked like a place where I could start over. But I didn't want to just disappear. I wanted David to know what he'd lost. I wanted him to understand the consequences of his actions. So I hired a private investigator. I want to know everything about my son's finances, I told him. Every debt, every asset, every source of income. What I learned didn't surprise me, but it did disgust me. David owed money to everyone. Credit card companies, his landlord, even a payday loan company. The money I'd given him hadn't gone to necessities. It had gone to cover his gambling debts, his drinking, his reckless lifestyle. Crystal, it turned out, had a record for fraud and theft. She'd been arrested twice for scamming elderly people out of their savings. David had brought a criminal into my home, and he'd known it. He'd known exactly what kind of person she was, and he hadn't cared. As long as she validated his decision to get rid of his inconvenient mother, nothing else mattered. Armed with this information, I made my final preparations. I opened a new bank account at a different bank, one David didn't know about. I transferred most of my savings there, leaving just enough in the old account to cover my monthly expenses for a few months. Then, I started packing. Not everything. I couldn't take a lifetime of possessions to a small apartment, but the things that mattered. Robert's medals from his Navy service, our wedding album, the china we'd received as wedding gifts and used only on special occasions, pictures of David from when he was still my son, not the stranger he'd become. I donated most of the furniture to charity. Let someone else get use out of the dining room set where David and I had shared so many meals back when he still said please and thank you. Let someone else sleep in the guest bed where he'd recovered from childhood illnesses while I brought him soup and read him stories. The hardest part was packing up David's old room. It was exactly as he'd left it when he moved out at 22, baseball trophies on the shelves, a poster of his favorite band on the wall, books from high school still on the desk. I'd kept it as a shrine to the boy he'd been, hoping someday he'd want to visit his past. Now I saw it for what it was, a monument to my own denial. This room represented the David who existed only in my memories, not the man who had told me to get out of my own home. I packed the trophies carefully, along with his report cards and school pictures. Not because I thought he'd want them, but because they belonged to him. Whatever he'd become, he'd earned those trophies honestly. That boy deserved to have his achievements preserved, even if the man had forgotten who that boy was. 2 months after David left, I was ready. I'd found tenants for the house, a lovely young couple with a baby, people who would fill it with laughter and love again. I'd arranged for my mail to be forwarded. I'd said goodbye to my neighbors, most of whom were shocked to learn I was moving. "But Margaret, this is your home," Marie said when I told her. "You and Robert were so happy here." "We were," I agreed. "But that chapter is over now. It's time to start a new one." I didn't tell her about David. I didn't tell anyone about David. Let them think I was just ready for a change, ready for an adventure. Let them think I was brave instead of broken. The night before I left, I sat in the empty house one last time. The walls echoed with memories, Robert's laughter, David's childhood chatter, dinner conversations, and holiday celebrations. For a moment, I almost changed my mind. Almost decided to stay and fight for this place that held so much of my history. But then I remembered David's words, "You're in the way, get out." And I knew I was making the right choice. I wasn't running away. I was choosing myself for the first time in years. I left at dawn when the streets were empty and the morning fog was just beginning to lift. I didn't look back at the house as I drove away. I'd already said my goodbyes to the life I'd built there. Now it was time to see what came next. But I had one more stop to make before I started my new life. I drove to David's apartment complex and parked across the street. I'd never been there. He'd never invited me, but the private investigator had given me the address. I sat in my car for an hour, waiting. Finally, David emerged, Crystal beside him. They were arguing about something, their voices carrying across the parking lot. He looked older somehow, tired. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there when he lived with me. For a moment, I felt a pang of the old love, the old worry. My maternal instincts kicked in, wanting to go to him, to smooth those lines away, to ask if he was eating enough, sleeping enough, taking care of himself. But then I saw him grab Crystal's arm roughly, saw her flinch, and I remembered who he'd become. This wasn't my little boy anymore. This was a man who had chosen his path, made his decisions, burned his bridges. He'd chosen Crystal over his mother, chosen immediate gratification over long-term relationships, chosen selfishness over love. I started my car and drove away without him ever knowing I'd been there. The apartment in Oceanside was small but perfect. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a tiny kitchen, and a living room with sliding glass doors that opened onto a balcony overlooking the Pacific. I could hear the waves from my bed at night, a sound that reminded me of the lullabies I used to sing to David when he was small. My neighbors were wonderful. There was Helen, a retired teacher who led a book club. Frank, a widower who had been a chef and organized potluck dinners. Maria, who had raised 6 children and understood the particular heartbreak of adult children who disappoint you. "It's not about the money," I told Maria one evening as we sat on the community patio watching the sunset. "It's about the disrespect, the way he made me feel like I didn't matter." "I know, mija," she said, patting my hand. "My oldest son, he's the same way. Takes and takes, never gives back. You did the right thing." For the first time in months, I felt understood. These people had lived full lives, raised children, buried spouses, survived disappointments. They knew that love wasn't always enough, that sometimes you had to choose your own dignity over someone else's convenience. I started volunteering at the local animal shelter, walking dogs and socializing cats. There's something healing about caring for creatures who appreciate kindness without taking it for granted. The dogs didn't care that I was 73, or that my son had abandoned me. They just cared that I showed up, that I was gentle with them, that I offered them comfort. I took a watercolor class and discovered I had a talent for painting seascapes. I joined the book club and rediscovered my love of reading. I learned to play bridge and made friends who invited me to birthday parties and holiday dinners. Slowly, quietly, I built a new life. Not the life I'd planned, not the life I'd dreamed of when David was small and the future seemed full of promise, but a good life, nonetheless. A life with dignity, with purpose, with people who valued my presence instead of just my checkbook. 6 months after I moved, David found me. I don't know how. Maybe he'd been in touch with one of the neighbors from the old house. My phone rang on a Tuesday evening, and his name appeared on the screen. For a moment, I hesitated. Part of me, the mother part that never completely dies, wanted to answer. Wanted to hear his voice, to know if he was okay, to give him one more chance to be the son I'd raised him to be. But I thought about the life I was building, the peace I'd found, the self-respect I'd fought so hard to reclaim, and I let the call go to voicemail. His message was exactly what I expected. "Mom, I heard you moved. Look, I know we had some problems, but you're my mother. We're family. Crystal and I broke up, and I realize I made some mistakes. I want to talk to you. I want to work things out." He called again the next day, and the day after that. Each message was more desperate, more manipulative. He was sorry. He missed me. He needed me. He'd learned his lesson. But notice what he didn't say. He didn't say I'd been right to demand respect. He didn't acknowledge that he'd been cruel, that he'd tried to force me out of my own home. He didn't take responsibility for the months of financial and emotional abuse. No, his apologies were all about him. His mistakes, his lessons learned, his need for forgiveness. Never mind my hurt, my dignity, my right to live peacefully without being used and discarded. After the first week, I stopped listening to the messages. I just deleted them. Then I blocked his number entirely. I changed my phone number and didn't give the new one to anyone who might pass it along to him. Some people might call that harsh. Some people might say a mother should always forgive, always give her child another chance, always keep the door open. But those people never had to watch their child's love turn into calculation. They never had to realize that every "I love you" came with a price tag attached. They never had to choose between their own dignity and their child's convenience. I chose myself. For the first time in 73 years, I chose myself. If you're watching this, if you're a woman my age, dealing with adult children who take advantage of your love, I want you to know something. You don't owe them your life savings. You don't owe them your home. You don't owe them your peace of mind. Yes, we raised them. Yes, we sacrificed for them. Yes, we love them more than life itself. But love is supposed to be reciprocal. Respect is supposed to be mutual. Family is supposed to be about more than what you can provide financially. If your adult child treats you like an ATM, that's not love. If they make you feel guilty for having boundaries, that's manipulation. If they expect you to sacrifice your security for their convenience, that's abuse. You are not responsible for fixing their problems. You are not obligated to fund their lifestyle. You are not required to accept disrespect in the name of family loyalty. You deserve better. You deserve to be treated with kindness and respect. You deserve to enjoy the life you've worked so hard to build. You deserve peace in your golden years. It's been a year now since I left that house. A year since I chose myself over the son who stopped being my son long before I admitted it. Do I miss him? Every day. Do I grieve for the relationship we used to have? Constantly. Do I sometimes wonder if I was too harsh, too unforgiving? Of course. But then I wake up in my little apartment by the sea, and I make coffee just the way I like it, and I plan my day around things that bring me joy instead of obligations that drain me. I spend time with people who appreciate my company, not people who see me as a resource to be managed. I paint watercolors of the sunset. I read books that make me think. I volunteer at the shelter and feel useful in a way that has nothing to do with money. I have dinner with friends who value my stories, my opinions, my presence. This isn't the life I planned, but it's a good life. It's a life with dignity, with purpose, with peace. It's a life where I matter for who I am, not what I can provide. To David, if you're somehow watching this, I want you to know that I loved you with every fiber of my being. I would have given you anything, sacrificed everything, if you had just treated me with basic human respect. But love without respect isn't love at all. It's just need dressed up in pretty words. I hope someday you'll understand what you lost. Not the money. Money comes and goes. But the love of someone who would have stood by you through anything, if only you'd let her maintain her dignity while doing it. I hope you'll learn to treat the people who love you better than you treated me. I hope you'll discover that taking care of someone doesn't mean letting them take care of everything for you. I hope you'll find your way back to the good person I know you can be. But I won't be there to see it. I can't be. I gave you 38 years of unconditional love, and in return, you gave me a year of being treated like an inconvenience. That's not a fair trade, and I'm done making unfair trades. To the women watching this who see themselves in my story, it's not too late. It's never too late to choose yourself. It's never too late to demand the respect you deserve. It's never too late to start over. You are not too old to build a new life. You are not too set in your ways to make changes. You are not obligated to accept mistreatment just because it comes from family. You raised your children to be independent, capable adults. Let them be independent and capable. Stop enabling their poor choices with your good intentions. Stop sacrificing your security for their convenience. Love them, but love yourself too. Support them, but don't support them at the expense of your own well-being. Be there for them, but don't let them take advantage of your presence. Set boundaries, enforce consequences, demand respect, and if they can't give you those basic courtesies, then love them from a distance. Love them enough to let them face the consequences of their actions. Love them enough to stop rescuing them from problems they created for themselves. I'm 74 now, and I finally understand something it took me a lifetime to learn. You can't love someone into loving you back. You can't sacrifice your way into someone else's gratitude. You can't buy respect with generosity. Real love, the kind worth having, comes freely. It comes with kindness and consideration and basic human decency. It doesn't come with invoices attached or conditions that drain your soul. I have that kind of love now. I have it from my friends here at the community. I have it from the volunteers at the shelter. I have it from Maria, who brings me soup when I'm sick, and Frank, who fixes my leaky faucet without being asked, and Helen, who saves me books she thinks I'll enjoy. These people barely know me compared to how well David knew me, but they treat me better than he ever did in his adult life. They see me as a whole person, not just a source of financial support. They appreciate my company, not just my checkbook. This is what family should feel like. This is what love should look like. This is what I deserved all along, but I was too afraid to demand it. I'm not afraid anymore. I'm 74 years old, and I'm finally free. The sun is setting over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Tomorrow I'll wake up and make my coffee and plan another day of this small, peaceful life I've built from the ashes of my old one. It's enough. I'm enough. And if you're watching this, struggling with your own ungrateful children, your own impossible family situations, your own choice between enabling and boundaries, you're enough too. Choose yourself. It's not selfish. It's survival.